The Battle of Stalingrad, August 23, 1942 to February 2, 1943, was one of the most significant confrontations of World War II and a turning point on the Eastern Front. It pitted the forces of Nazi Germany and its Axis allies against the Soviet Union for control of the city of Stalingrad, now Volgograd, in southern Russia. The battle is often regarded as one of the bloodiest in human history, marked by brutal urban combat, massive casualties, and eventual Soviet victory, which irreversibly shifted the balance of power in the war. Strategic context. The Battle of Stalingrad arose from Adolf Hitler's ambition to conquer Soviet territories, secure vital resources, and demoralize the Soviet populace. Stalingrad held symbolic and strategic importance. Named after Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, its capture would be a propaganda victory for the Nazis. Strategically, Stalingrad was a critical industrial hub and a gateway to the oil-rich Caucasus region, which Germany needed to fuel its war machine. In 1942, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa's successor, Operation Blue, aiming to advance through southern Russia and seize the Caucasus oil fields. The German Sixth Army, under General Friedrich Paulus, and the 4th Panzer Army, supported by Luftwaffe bombers, were tasked with capturing Stalingrad. Early German advances. The battle began on August 23, 1942, when German forces reached the outskirts of Stalingrad. The Luftwaffe launched devastating air raids, reducing much of the city to rubble. These attacks killed tens of thousands of civilians and displaced many more. Despite the destruction, the ruins created an environment well suited for Soviet defensive tactics, as rubble hindered the movement of German tanks and infantry. Initially, the Germans achieved significant gains. By September, they had pushed Soviet forces into a narrow strip of territory along the western bank of the Volga River. However, the Soviets, under General Vasily Chukhov's command of the 62nd Army, entrenched themselves in the city and adopted a not one step back policy, as mandated by Stalin's infamous Order No. 227. Urban warfare. The urban combat in Stalingrad was ferocious and relentless. Soviet soldiers and civilians fought house to house, room to room, often engaging in close-quarters battles. The city became a theater of Rattenkrieg, rat war, where both sides endured grueling conditions. Factories, sewers, and apartment blocks became battlegrounds, with iconic sites like the Mamiev Kurgan, the Pavlov's house, and the Red October factory becoming symbols of Soviet resistance. Chukhov's strategy relied on tenacity and exploiting the close quarters, nullifying Germany's advantages in air power and mechanized units. Soviet forces made extensive use of snipers, machine guns, and grenades. One of the most famous snipers was Vasily Zaitsev, credited with over 200 kills during the battle. Soviet counteroffensive, Operation Uranus. As the Germans became bogged down in Stalingrad, the Soviet High Command, Stavka, led by Marshal Georgy Zhukov and others, planned a decisive counteroffensive. Codenamed Operation Uranus, the plan aimed to encircle the German Sixth Army and its supporting forces by targeting the weaker Axis flanks, manned by Romanian, Italian, and Hungarian troops who were ill-equipped for the harsh winter. On November 19, 1942, Soviet forces launched a massive, coordinated assault north and south of Stalingrad. The offensive quickly overwhelmed the Axis defenses, and by November 23, the Soviet pincers met near the town of Kaluk, encircling approximately 300,000 German and Axis troops in Stalingrad. The encirclement. The encirclement trapped Paulus's Sixth Army in a precarious position. Despite the worsening situation, Hitler forbade any retreat, declaring Stalingrad a fortress to be held at all costs. Paulus requested permission to break out of the encirclement, but Hitler refused, believing that Luftwaffe supply drops, overseen by Hermann Göring, could sustain the trapped forces. In reality, the airlift operations fell woefully short, delivering only a fraction of the required supplies. Conditions inside the pocket deteriorated rapidly. Soldiers faced extreme cold, starvation, disease, and relentless Soviet attacks. Desperate German troops resorted to eating horses, pets, and, in some cases, human flesh. Morale plummeted as the prospect of relief faded. Operation Winter Storm and Soviet response. In December 1942, the Germans launched Operation Winter Storm, an attempt by Field Marshal Erich von Manstein to break through Soviet lines and relieve the Sixth Army. While initially successful in pushing toward Stalingrad, the operation stalled due to stiff Soviet resistance and logistical challenges. The Sixth Army remained isolated. Meanwhile, the Soviets initiated Operation Little Saturn, targeting the Italian and Hungarian forces further west. This widened the front and forced the Germans to divert resources, sealing the fate of Paulus's army. Collapse of the Sixth Army. By January 1943, the situation for the Germans in Stalingrad was untenable. Soviet forces, under the command of Zhukov and others, launched a final offensive, reducing the German pocket in Stalingrad to a small area. Starvation, frostbite, and unrelenting Soviet artillery fire devastated the remaining German troops. On January 31, 1943, Paulus surrendered to the Soviets, despite Hitler's promotion of him to Field Marshal, a clear signal that he was expected to fight to the death. By February 2, 1943, all organized resistance had ceased, marking the end of the battle. Casualties and human cost. The Battle of Stalingrad was one of the deadliest battles in history. Estimates vary, but total casualties, military and civilian, exceeded 2 million. Soviet losses were staggering, with over 1 million killed, wounded, or captured, including massive civilian casualties. German and Axis forces suffered approximately 850,000 casualties, with most of the Sixth Army annihilated. The human suffering during the battle was immense. Civilians endured bombings, starvation, and brutal conditions, while soldiers on both sides experienced unimaginable horrors. Casualties and human cost. The Battle of Stalingrad was one of the deadliest battles in history. Estimates vary, but total casualties, military and civilian, exceeded 2 million. Soviet losses were staggering, with over 1 million killed, wounded, or captured, including massive civilian casualties. German and Axis forces suffered approximately 850,000 casualties, with most of the Sixth Army annihilated. The human suffering during the battle was immense. Civilians endured bombings, starvation, and brutal conditions, while soldiers on both sides experienced unimaginable horrors. Aftermath and significance. The Soviet victory at Stalingrad marked a major turning point in World War II. It shattered the myth of Nazi invincibility and boosted Soviet morale. The Germans lost their strategic initiative on the Eastern Front, and the Red Army began a series of offensives that would eventually push the Nazis back to Berlin. For Germany, the defeat was catastrophic. The loss of the Sixth Army and vast amounts of equipment weakened the Wehrmacht, while Hitler's insistence on holding Stalingrad exposed his strategic inflexibility. The battle also highlighted the growing effectiveness of Soviet military leadership and coordination. Stalingrad became a symbol of Soviet resilience and sacrifice. It also had profound psychological effects on the German military and civilian population, sowing doubt about the war's ultimate outcome.